supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace?
Episode has been brought to you by Broad's Beard Care. Go to see Kelly Brott at broadsbeardcare.com. Use promo code 3beards with a capital B, and you're going to save 20% off your entire order, along with free shipping on every order. Premium products, we all love them, we all use them, highly recommend them. Check him out, broadsbeardcare.com. And at this time, we have the pleasure of a guest. She somehow let us talk her into showing up here. Hopefully we can make this a pleasurable experience for her. Dr. Rida Lousie. She's a founder of the Institute of Applied Energetics and the host of Energy Radio. She's a naturopathic physician and a 20-year veteran in the human potential field. She's a medical intuitive, clairvoyant, and she's author of several works, including one of the ones that we're going to be talking about tonight, Stepping Out of Eden. Basically, I'm going to let you kind of sum it up. I mean, for me, I was going to say basically how we got to where we are now, through human, I want to say evolution, but I'm not sure if that's going to be the best thing. But welcome to the show, and I'll let you explain kind of a little bit better than I just did.
Yeah. Okay. So Stepping Out of Eden looks at the concept of how humans became human. So when you look at anthropology books, that talk about ancient man, all they really talk about is the archaeology, about this bone that they found and our ability to walk upright and just very physiological changes. But something happened to what were animals, that were our Australopithecines or early apes that intervened, that made us become human, to have culture, to have society, to have laws, that we wear clothes, that we have ritual, that we have culture. And so that book really looks at it, that topic, and I'm just going to kind of veer here. So prior to that, I wrote a book called E.T. Chronicles, What Myth and Legends Have to Say About Human Origin. And so that looks at the story of how we got here from a mythological perspective, but it looks at the story of the planet and not really the story of humanity. And in putting that material together, one of the things that came to the forefront was that the advent of humanity literally came at the end of the book. It was the second to last chapter of the book, where humanity actually came into this whole mythic narrative. And I decided that instead of trying to take all this other data about the development of humanity, I would just make it be its own separate topic. And so that's how it became its own independent book, because there was a lot of material to talk about.
Oh, it was, and I want to compliment you on the way you wrote it too. I really enjoyed some of the chapters in it. One of the things I wanted to get to you about is I've never believed that we were the only intelligent civilization that's been on this planet. I feel like there's been multiple variations, and I liked how you went through and just kind of showed, through where some groups say, well, we're only this. Well, then this clearly can't be the case, because here's this thing that you look at these records. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years before people are doing a cutoff, saying this is when we think, I apologize, the names are failing me here, but right where the missing link. Right when they're talking like, well, here's the missing link. Well, I've always been kind of the mindset, whether we want to say it's the Anunnaki, whether we want to say something, there was something that happened because
Correct.
there's clearly this wasn't something that we evolved from just the simple primate, because like you said, what changes, because there's that big fundamental difference between a chimpanzee and us. Because chimpanzee, one of the stories I think he did is where I think it was one of the it was a type of monkey that would picked up the trait of washing the sweet potatoes.
Yes.
And that was something that wasn't taught to them. Just one learned how to do it, and then now you have this whole species that washes sweet potatoes, and that's what they do instinctively. But how did it go? How did we go from being that to suddenly what we're doing right now? There obviously had to be something. But
see, you use a very interesting word. You say instinctively, but they don't do it instinctively. They're taught, because the mama chimpanzee goes down to the water and washes the sweet potato off. So now the baby goes and washes the sweet potato off. So there are generations of learning and education that happen, and so I believe that, so there are a lot of biological changes that happen in our makeup that scientists can't figure out, especially, if it's supposed to be this long and gradual process. How did we go from, Homo habilis, which is a very early primate that was a very early tool builder or tool user, to being Neanderthal, which, from a physiological place are very different in less than 3 million years. It's not a gradual process. And scientists keep looking for the missing link, but maybe the link isn't missing. Maybe there was some kind of genetic engineering that occurred as part of that process. And I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between the two books. One of the things that they talk about, when you look at the mythic record, I'll say it this way, when you look at the mythic record, they never talk about a slow and gradual process. They only talk about that humanity was created, period. Mm-hmm. Now, there are stories that talk about multiple versions of man. Like in the Popol Vuh, they talk about that, the first humans were created out of clay, and then they got rained on and melted. And then the second group were made out of wood, but they were too stupid, so they got rid of them. And then the third group were made out of corn, which I found this very interesting: red, white, yellow, and black. Now, if you think about the races of humanity, we have red, white, yellow, and black. And it's like, that's, a little coinky-dink there. But you find the same thing in the Sumerian text, where they talk about multiple iterations until they found a working model that they invested energy in.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that was kind of just where I was looking forward to getting to you on this too. It's just, not only just from your book. I mean, you made, I'll have you maybe touch on that a little bit, without getting too dry. I mean, because, you start throwing a bunch of numbers, people's eyes just start glazing over, because you can only remember just so much. But for me, it was that thing. It's like there had to have been something, because, I mean, we went from primates that were grabbing a rock, grabbing something and learning to smash it, to suddenly we're building complicated tools and using the start of a critical thinking patterns coming in, where, oh wow, hey, this worked great here. Well, now I can use it over in this aspect, and like you said, with the monkeys washing sweet potatoes, well, they haven't figured out how to peel those potatoes.
Right.
So what was the critical link that, that, like in your feeling, that took us from washing a sweet potato to suddenly we figured, hey, if we peel these things, we can cook these things now with fire, and this is a much better product than just eating a washed potato out of the Ganges River.
Well, but if you look at the mythic record, and let me kind of explain my methodology to people, because I think it'll have it make more sense. So when I do my work, I look at things like what the mythic record says. I look at things at what like the archaeological record says, and there's a certain level, especially in those two books, that I look for parallels around the world, the global narrative. So when you ask that question of how did we learn this stuff, and this is a line that I put in the book, which was, based on the mythic record, humanity was a pretty dumb lot, and it doesn't ever say, like, there was a series that was Mankind, the History of All of Us, something like that. And it was talking about, well, Sally Joe in the Fertile Crescent decided to take some seeds and plant them in her front yard, and boom, she discovered agriculture. But you look at the mythic record and it doesn't say anything like that. It says that the gods taught us which plants were good to eat, which ones were good for nutrition. In Australia, they talk about the gods gave them the digging stick so that they could pull up tubers, because they didn't do sweet potatoes. And so everything that we've learned according to myth, or a lot of the basic things that we learned, were always taught to us by the gods. And then that learning, kind of like the sweet potato situation, was passed on one generation to the next generation to the next generation, and then developed as we became smarter and more experienced with that technique or that tool.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was, going to. It's just, you see in the records of a lot of cultures, they all have, the people that discount it. I'm like, how can we have something from Africa, from the Middle East, from far Asia, South America, the native tribes here in the Americas, they all have this common theme. This can't be something that just a bunch of amazing storytellers, the Stephen King of all of their, of all these cultures, came up with the same exact story. There has to be something in our past that this happened, because it's just the odds, just mathematical odds of all these different cultures coming up with the same ideas is, it's astronomical on the numbers.
Well, one of the most common myths that you find around the world, so this is the second most common myth. The first most common myth that you find around the world is the flood narrative, Noah, the ark, that whole thing, which I talk about in the other book. The second most common narrative you find around the world is the of fire being given to humanity. So you have Loki gives fire to the Celtic god, or Norse god, gives fire to humanity and he's punished. Prometheus gives fire to humanity and he's chained to a rock, and an eel comes and eats his liver every day. But they're kind of geographically similarly located. But then you have, in the Americas, you have the trickster god who gives humanity fire to use, and he's punished, and so it's always this trickster, this god that always is kind of getting in trouble for, like, giving humanity stuff, educating humanity, and then getting in trouble for it. And so even though the details are different, there's still this basic nugget. Fire is given to humanity. It's this trickster kind of person. If you really want to kind of take it down, many times that trickster character is identified as a half man, half fish. So you get your, I like to say reptilians, kind of thrown in there. And but again, it's the same story that you find over and over and over again. And many people suggest that the intervention that happened into our timeline occurred about 40,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago. And one of the things that I put out, which meets with some disagreement, is that this intervention actually happened millions of years ago, because why have a story of fire and the gods giving us fire that we find around the world if we already had fire 100,000 years ago or 40,000 years ago? There would be no need to have a creation story tied to it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And just FYI, we had control of fire as early as, or as late as, I think it was earlier than this, but as late as like 780,000 BC.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, with the Nephilim, the Greek gods, it's almost, we're talking about the same characters, but using different names.
Correct. I didn't know Mark was going to ask me questions.
Oh, yeah.
I actually have quite a few jotted
Well, see,
down.
I didn't know you were going to be asking. See, he knows way
he's
too
here
much.
Yeah, he's here for more than just eye candy.
Yeah. me and Austin are the eye candy.
I did suggest he get a Santa beard to be on the show.
Oh,
Santa,
hey,
baby.
next time.
Okay, so what was the question about Nephilim and the?
Oh, it's basically
about the different
same
names.
For,
yeah. So one of the things that you find in myth is, so for example, in Greek cosmology, there's Gaia, and it translates to Earth Mother, and you go into other cultures, like in Native American, actually Mayan culture, they have Citlalique. And it translates to Earth Mother. And so many of the names, they're different names, but what they equal in their culture is the same, and so there are some very specific, I like saying iconographical attributes that are tied to them, where there's the trickster god. There is what I call the sky god who, he lived in the sky. He's often representative with white, long hair and a flowing beard, is in charge of judgment, and he wields the lightning bolt. Maybe a hammer, maybe a club, but pretty much if you sit there and you look at these groups, you can look around the world and go, oh, well, that's who they're really talking about. If I say Enki, you guys are familiar with the concept of who Enki is. He's the Sumerian fertility god.
Yes, I do. I do. I'm not going to speak for everybody else, but yeah.
And so images of him show him with like this flowing water, actually water spouting off of his shoulders. So if you see a picture, of a carving from Sumeria, that has this guy with these streams and maybe even little fish in the streams coming off of his shoulders, that's who it is. Kind of like Santa. Whenever you see a picture of Santa, you know who it is. No one has to tell you. So that's the iconography. Well, in South America, in Peru, I found this very interesting, and actually in my icon video, Mark, I bring this up because it was very visual. They have this, they call it the floating god. And this god has these little streaming things coming off of his shoulders. And so, and not that I've done this exhaustive search, but I think if you actually start looking at the art and the artwork around the world, you could start tying names to who some of these people are in different cultures, even though, just based on their representations.
Yeah, and Dr. Reed, with what you're saying seems very similar to what your good buddy Laird Scranton was talking about when he was a guest with us last week. He maintains that there's all this diffusion going on. People migrating all around the world, taking their observations and cultural ideas with them, and that's just an easy explanation for why there's so many of these similar characteristics around the same time at vastly distant places in the world.
Well, I have a little different take on it.
Okay.
And not that I'm necessarily dismissing what Laird says, because I think he's a great researcher, but I come at it from a little bit different perspective. I think it's more likely, since we're finding these same gods everywhere, and these gods taught us stuff, that these same gods are the ones that educated us. And so we have that cultural memory of who they are.
Yeah.
So it's not that it moved all around, and I'm going to kind of shift topic here from representations, because even in the stepping out of Eden, I really look at a lot of cultural things, and behaviors, because it's our behaviors that really separate us from the animal community. And one of the earliest cultural thing that we have in humanity, and this is going to sound really weird, is the concept of marriage. And tied to that is this whole idea of taboos. So originally you would marry somebody that you couldn't marry somebody from your own clan. So if we were the Rabbit clan, if we were the bearded man clan, I couldn't marry a bearded man. I could marry Mark, no beard. Oh, it's all good. Mark, we can get married. Anyway, so. And if I did marry somebody from the bearded man clan, then it would be taboo. It would be toxic. And so there were these regulations that you would find within cultures. And so you find that rule. I mean, it's a rule in pretty much every culture on the planet. Now, tied to that, there are other rules, such as men could have sex with women, but once they got married, they were taboo. Now, there are cultures that still have that thing in effect. Like in some Middle Eastern cultures, it's like, well, they can have sex, but not if you're a married woman. And so we find that even coming into the present day, there were harsh penalties if you married somebody, or if you had sex with a married woman. They would cut your nose off. They would kill you. Seriously. They would kill you. You would be banished from the community. I mean, they obviously didn't want you doing that. Now, one researcher suggests, and I totally agree, that if the concept of marriage is just something that randomly sprung up around the world, like for some reason, Mark, I wanted to marry you. I don't know why, but I did.
So mean.
Then the marriage cultures here in Texas would be different than the marriage cultures in California, because you could marry a gay person in California, or a transgender person. That was really politically incorrect, wasn't it? Okay, moving on.
I had a question. To back up a couple segues. Do you think that the gods are people's perception of how the god is supposed to look, or you think these are different gods? I know I've seen the god with the lightning bolt, and do you think these people? I know there's people gods that they worship, but do you think they're all equated to the same god, or people have
So I believe that, when we talk about the gods, we're actually talking about a pretty finite group of people that were experienced everywhere. And I do not believe that they were doing ancestor worship. These were some people that lived in the past, and now they somehow became gods. It seems, when I do my research, I like looking for the really old stuff. And so I've read a lot of books that were written in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when Europeans were going to Australia and New Zealand and the Americas, where they had pretty pristine interactions with indigenous cultures and then would report on it. And it seemed clear that they could separate out, because they did have ancestor worship. I mean, in India, there's a lot of ancestor worship. In Vietnam or in South America, they still venerate ancestors. But they could separate out, this was a god and this was not. But then there's one other little piece that I find really interesting, if it was someone that we were venerating as an ancestor, then why do we get down on our knees and worship them? Why did we decide to become submissive to great 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 grandpa? I mean, it makes no sense unless they had some kind of power and control over who we were.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I was just, it was one of those, and that was the part, like, just through your book. That's the part I loved about this book. I'm really looking forward to checking out the ET one as well. Just that.
I think you'll even like that one better. The comments I got from that book was, okay, it makes your head spin. So if this is making your head spin, that makes your head spin even more.
Yeah, that's good. And that's, because it's always just been a fascination for me. And like Dan Duke, he just commented this. About your,
look at that beard.
So, now you got to give him that. Remember, you got to give him that.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, that's right.
You're going to be in town this weekend.
Yeah, you got to give him. Yeah, it's like I said, I like the way you explain, just like he said. I like the way you explained all the different variation, in the cultures, and it was really, because there's always a thing. You see these different accounts, and it's not until you have something like your work that brings them together that you can actually, you have them so close together and you can compare them, and that's what was really awesome. Is because you're looking at it, and now you're like, okay, that does make sense, because this actually has always just been, like you pull that thread, it's like, this is sticking out. I gotta dig into this. Keep pulling it. Yeah, and because every time I go, there's just always something that just bothers me. I was, we're not getting, not bashing anybody in religion, but I was raised Christian, just hardcore. But then as I got older, I started really starting to question, things, because it didn't make sense. As we've had, we had a couple people on. We're going to have Gary Wayne back on to finish the thing. But it was the same thing. It's just like, here's this story about that we suddenly just appeared, but it doesn't explain how all these other civilizations are here. It talks about Cain leaving, and he obviously went to so there's something else there. I mean, it talks about all these creatures that aren't satyrs, all these things that aren't supposed to be, they're not supposed to, well, obviously they're there. So there's this whole other thing. So obviously the Bible doesn't explain. So either Adam and Eve were like down the line of experiments, like I said, and we finally came up with, okay, these ones are going to work, okay, now put them in paradise, and see what happens. But it doesn't explain all the things like yours did. This is what came before. This is, we can't ignore this evidence. I mean, this evidence is right here, and this is clearly dates way before even the Christian creation theory.
Well, so when I was working on the E.T. Chronicles book, there were two things that I needed to really put to the side. One was the Bible. I mean, not that I was raised Catholic, but, put that to the side. And then I had to take Zachariah Sitchin's work and put that to the side, because I didn't want to either reiterate what he said and I didn't want to try to prove the Bible. I didn't want the book to be about proving or disproving the Bible, so I just said, I'm just going to look for what's there and move forward. And so what I found very interesting was that the mythic record, this global narrative, it's not one country, it is a narrative that you find around the world, is very consistent, and it is consistent with the Bible, with one exception. There's only one God in the Bible. All these other cultures have multiple gods, and so if you sit there with a giant can of whiteout, and get rid of all of the gods and all of this prehistory where the gods are fighting each other and Zeus is coming after Kronos and all of this crazy stuff is going on, you end up with about 3 pages. You end up with the end of the book.
I went to Bible college and they hated this question. One of the ones I asked them, it's like the passage, "Thou shalt not put any other gods before me." That doesn't say I'm the only one. It says none come before me. That's just saying you worship me first. I'm not, it doesn't say don't worship anybody else. It's saying none come before me. And at that point, I asked him, I go, well, doesn't this confirm every other culture's thing, that there's the one Odin, Zeus. I mean, you go down, there's the supreme, and then you have this whole underclass of gods that are around him. And like you said, every culture talks about a sky god. Every single one. And so the Bible is taking, and the Bible is notorious, Christianity is notorious for adapting and basically it's like the Borg. As it was going around, it would assimilate any pagan culture it came across. It would pull this in. I mean, the Christmas tradition, that wasn't Christianity. That was pagans. Easter, that was pagans. I mean, there was all these pagan celebrations that are now part of Christianity, and that's what I said. It's just one more iteration of the same worldwide, like you said, the mythic, just the same story that's across the globe. And so that's always been the question: is we got to get past this? God is one, is number one. All is number one. We got to get past this thing of just doing these social clubs and figure out there's got to be if everybody just stops for a second, there's a commonality here. We're all talking about something that is not us, that made us. Everybody's talking about the same thing. It's like, I think we can kind of come together here.
But there is the supreme, ultimate creator God, who may or may not have long white hair and a flowing beard, that created us. Whether it's an energy or a presence or whatever. And we don't know. And I'm not going to try to speculate because I don't know, But then there's the gods that we find, or the God that we find in the Bible, or the gods that we find in myth. And they are not representative of that omnipotent creator being that we are brought forward believing. And since you used Star Trek, I'm just going to throw a Star Trek back.
Yes.
Okay. So when I think of an omnipotent creator God, and you're going to laugh, I think of Q.
Yes, I'm just going to say it. Come on, yes, Q.
Boop.
Right there.
Yeah.
And he makes a galaxy appear. Now that's an omnipotent creator God. The gods that we find in myth have technology. They have flying machines, they have magical weapons, they have all of this stuff that we can look at today and see the technological aspect of it. But thousands of years ago, where the best thing they had was a bow and arrow, and they didn't even have a wheel, it would be pretty impressive. There was a video I watched of this guy went into the Amazon and was interacting with this tribe that had never been around people. And he had a lighter, like a big lighter. And they were flabbergasted with this lighter. And so any level of technology that we maybe would bring with us, would be intense and overwhelming to them.
Oh,
and magical.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's oh God, I wish I could attribute this to the right person, but it was basically this description. Like, we went back in time to the Victorian era with just, with a nuclear bomb. It's like they would be, I don't know what this is. Boom, they're gonna blow. They're gonna blow it themselves up. It's not that they're dumb. It's just they don't know what this object is. Just like us, supposedly with what was, what we have on here, and they're trying to reverse engineer. We don't know what we're messing with. I mean, we might be messing with something that's going to be, it's like, what is it? Boom, just the red button. And there's a lot of things that I just, it's like, one, from all these books, can we figure out some way, especially like historians, can we write some stuff to where it's not such a mystery, thousands of years in the future, where people actually understand what's going on? Because it's just, you look back and you're like, here's these major things. Like, we'll talk about the Bible. You have these things. Here's supposedly the creator of everything, and we know almost or little about him.
Well, and a comment to that, because I get asked that a lot. It's like, why? Why create us? Why, give us upgrades? And the mythic record is completely silent on that. You know, there's the suggestion that we were made as a slave species and that we were here to dig gold and all that stuff. Never found it, which was one of the reasons I was glad I took Zachariah Sitchin's work and moved it over there, because I'll tell you my story. I spent an entire month, 10 to 12 hours a day, in front of my computer looking for the gold. I was like, because the whole premise of his series is about the gold. So there had to have been mythic evidence to support the gold. Never found it. Came up with other assertions tied to it, but never found it. You know, and there's no stories that come forward of humanity working particularly. You know, there are stories of people mining, but we don't know if it's humanity mining or if it's the giants, because there are stories of the giants doing the labors of the gods. And then that's one of the reasons why they had a war, is because they didn't want to do it anymore. You know, but there's not really evidence of us doing that kind of manual labor. And you would think that we would remember, you know, that there'd be some little story in some culture somewhere that it would have been retained.
Well, it's in, you know, kind of with Sitchin's work and stuff. You know, you come to the Sumerian, you know, tablets. You see pictures that when they draw, the one it shows the god inside the clay pot, you know, with the wings, and you know the Bible. You know, Elijah takes off in a fiery chariot, and I think they're describing potentially all the same thing. Here is a being who is being moved by something that flies, and in those cultures, they're trying their best to describe what it possibly could be.
Exactly.
In ancient cultures, they only know things that fly have wings. So of course they're going to depict this person getting into this jar with wings as, you know, it's not because some creator just like, oh yeah, that looks pretty cool. You know, that's some cool graffiti, you know, that I'm going to carve into this thing. They're trying to tell, you know, say, I mean, they didn't have the words, you know, it's like flying machine. They didn't have these things. I mean, they went with what they could have. And I think throughout the record, you have the stuff like the Chinese, the dragons. They're trying to describe flying in something. And this is, you know, this is the way that they came to depict these things. And like I said, once again, we keep saying the same, you know, it's playing repeating over and over again. The odds of all these different cultures coming up with the same style of stories is just crazy, astronomical.
I mean, I consider it being evidence.
Yeah,
that's my personal opinion. It's like, well, how can everybody say the same thing and have there not be a nugget of truth? You know, and some of the stories have really diverse angles to them. You know, so there's Mark brought it up, you know, in those days, the Nephilim walked the earth, and then the sons of God mated with the daughters of men, and their offspring were the men of renown, you know. And so in the biblical account, it comes off as this torrid event, you know, like, oh my God, you know, like they interbred. And I've only found one parallel story to that, which I found fascinating, and I really include in the Stepping Out of Eden book, because it adds timeline contextuality to it, and actually blew my mind because it fit the timeline perfectly. And so there's a book called the Ramayana, and it's the story of Rama and his adventures, and it's a really long book, and it's written in prose. And it was actually a pretty good book because I did read the whole thing, even though Rama was a whiner. And, you know, so basically Rama gets exiled because of a promise his father makes. And while he's in the woods with his brother and wife, his brother decides to shoot the nose off of a giant. And so this female giant gets really upset and kind of escalates her complaint to like the head giant. And so this whole group of giants come after Rama, and with his magical bow, slays all of them with one shot. Well, now the word is out, and they're after Rama. And so it gets up to the demon god of Lanka. Okay, and so this is like a big head honcho guy. He has his own Vimana. He's not a giant. He's a god. Okay, so now it's escalated to that, and it was just, and so Rama ends up having to go battle with Vimana. Okay, so you have to kind of back the story up a little bit. So that's kind of the general narrative, and so Vishnu knew that Rama was going to have to fight Vimana or Ravana in this war. But Rama didn't have any armies. And so Rama meets these people. They're half men, half apes, and they're called Vimana. And so the Vimana were actually a creation because Vishnu, knowing that Rama had to have this army, told the gods to come down from the heaven and mate with the apes on the planet, the apes and monkeys on the planet. And the offspring were these beings that had enhanced powers. So if your father was the god of wind, you could jump, really high and do all of these things. And so this army of half ape, half god, they were demigods, helped Rama win this war. Well, what's interesting is that there are apes depicted in Indian art that don't wear clothes. And there are apes depicted that are one of these Vimanas, and they all wear clothes. Like they were trained to wear clothes, that they were given an education, that they had a better intellectual capacity to do stuff. Yeah, and that's an image of what's called Rama's Bridge. That
I was using that to get my gold star to show that I did read your book and show that because I just knew where it come. Because during this battle, they had to build this bridge to get over there to fight, and I'm like, yes, score one for Craig.
And scientists have actually gone down and investigated this. Not a whole lot, and so there's a lot of infighting about what is real and what's not. Not anything new. But they suggest, based on what they have found underwater and core samples, that it was actually a constructed site and not a naturally forming shoal.
Well, you can see this right here. I've known that since I was little. Nature abhors straight lines. And here's this perfectly straight, this should be, if this was nature, this thing should just be all over the place, but here is this giant sweeping, just straight line, straight line bridge. I said it clearly, like you said, it just looking at it, the first thing when I saw it, but while I was reading, I had to look it up, and I was like, God, that definitely looks like it was in some way, like a man-made structure.
Well, when they went down to the base, they found that there was actually a sea floor, and then there were these rocks and boulders put on top. And so it wasn't like it was things that were blown in or that there was already a natural formation, hill, whatever, that attracted stuff. I mean,
yeah,
they can, they choose not to explain it, and then they just choose to hide it.
Because it would have, because people say, well, how would they have kept the water? I'm like, well, back, I think the water level at that time was also lower. So this would have been, basically, this would have just been like Romans, building a road surface. They would have made a wide surface for them to get across. And then as the water rises, now you have what looks like just this natural land bridge. And there's, welcome, nice to see you on there. But yeah, I'm. It was one of the. I was glad you brought that up because that was one of the stories I really liked out of the book too. Was that one about that? Because it kind of shows that just the story. There's always that tale, like the Anunnaki came down. Genetic manipulation created this race. And so here once again, we've got this Sumerian tale, and then we also have this one coming over from the Far East that amazingly they have a really similar sound to them.
Well, and the part that fascinated me the most in that is that when you look at the offspring of the sons of God and daughters of man, they are enhanced individuals. They're demigods. They're half man, half God. And these characters in the Ramayana are half man, half god. But the Ramayana places it in time. Hindu chronology is, big. And so it places the Ramayana, or the action of the Ramayana, at about 700. There are a couple of numbers that keep popping up, but that 780,000 years ago is a pretty big one that pops up. And so if that's when the Ramayana took place, and you back it up, it takes you back to the advent of Homo erectus, which walked upright, lost his body hair, wore clothes, had the use of fire, had the beginnings of early social culture. And they have found some pieces that they think are some very, very early pieces of art. So those are like the hallmark trappings of humanity. It's not just about living and surviving. It's about this whole depth and breadth of culture and society.
Now, this is a little. No, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, and somewhat related to more evidence of enhanced people was your writings on cranial deformation that showed that there was a social distinction with people with elongated skulls and wearing the hats, pointed hats.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of things that humanity did early on that are different. One of those was cranial deformation, and it was used as a symbol for, who a person is, and only people that had status were able to have their skulls deformed, and basically they would either take a board or two boards and press the head with straps, or they would take bands and wrap it around the head and cause it to kind of like Zippy the Pinhead point upright. And, basically whoever had the biggest head had the most power. So that was just a really interesting concept. So if you were a low class individual, you weren't allowed to have that done. Same with ear piercing or septum piercing, which is the little cartilage right here. Whoever had the biggest piercings.
I'm not picking my nose. I'm just showing it's right here.
But whoever had the biggest piercings usually were the ones that had the most power. Now, we were talking about, well, who decides this stuff? And why would someone go and inflict that kind of pain on a child? And what falls into this category also is circumcision. Circumcision is one of the most consistent ritual acts that is done on the planet. Now, and it's only really in Judaism that they do it early on. In many other indigenous cultures, they do it when you turn 13, when you are becoming a man. Now, why would anybody inflict that on themselves? Because
I don't know.
But the gods told them to do it, so they do it.
At 15? I'm good.
Well, like in Judaism, it's when they have their bar mitzvah, and so in many other cultures, when you are turning into a man, that's when ritual circumcision would happen. If they did like teeth ablation, which is them knocking teeth out, they would do that. Ritual tattooing usually happened around that point in time, or ritual scarification, and that was usually a sign that you were a man now. Now whether they did all of those things on the same day, same week, I don't really know, but those were all symbols. And so like with tattooing, if you were a boy and didn't have a tattoo, you were not considered a man. And so you could not participate in the hunt. You could not get married. There was a whole list of things that would not happen to you. You couldn't go into the men's hut, and participate. I mean, basically, you had to hang out with the women, folks.
Yeah.
I'm
You know,
cool with
and
it.
and it's a very visual symbol. I mean,
Yeah.
Circumcision you can kind of cover up. A tattoo is a little harder to do.
Some of the symbols of tattoos may have lost their meaning over time, but are there any symbols that do provide us a clue about the person who died?
So when you start talking about tattooing, different cultures had what I call a library of symbology. And I'm going to kind of shift from tattooing for a second and use a different example. So in China, they have something, or India, they have something that are called mudras. And so mudras are hand gestures and hand positions. And I really don't know anything about what mudras mean what. And so if I say something hand way offensively, sorry, don't really know. But if you see a statue and its hand is like this, that means something. Or like Buddha is often shown with his hands, kind of like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say just kind of then.
And so that hand position has very intrinsic meaning to it. And so the tattoos, if you had dots put on your body in a certain pattern, had this meaning to it. And so it kind of gave the history of your life. And so I think it's in one African culture, unless you've actually had it killed, you couldn't get ritually scarification. Ritual scarification is where they make little incisions into your skin to create a scar. And you find incisions done in basically cultures that their skin is very dark and a tattoo won't show up. And so over the years, we've lost the library. We've lost the vocabulary. Like in India, they know what this means, and there's books on it that I haven't studied, but they still recognize the intrinsic meaning. With tattoos, we've really lost that. But with all of these things, with the earrings and the septum piercing and, knocking certain teeth out, or the tattooing, you can really tell everything there is to know about a person based on how they look. So one of the things that I suggest in the book is that perhaps, people did these. So the gods told them to do these things, so like you could tell one clan from another. So you could tell the bearded tattoo clan from a different clan because they all had like a little beard on, or they had a little beard tattoo over here. And so you knew, like, I'm not supposed to mess around with any of you because, I can't, I'm a bearded tattoo girl and I can't like do bearded tattoo. And so it would give people instant recognition. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I suggested is perhaps very early on, and this, again, my thought is that perhaps the gods gave these things for people to do so that they could easily identify who they were. Kind of like tagging a cow's ear, or bringing it even more contemporary. You get your little, ID card that you put on the sensor at work, and it identifies who you are. By having tattoos placed in a certain way and having these different things done, it identifies who you are. As you go through different levels of initiation, you would get different tattoos. You would have other teeth knocked out, so they could quickly identify who are the people in charge, who has the biggest pointed head and the biggest ears. That's the guy who has gone through enough ritual initiation then maybe that's who the gods want to talk to, not the guy with the flat head and no beard.
That's right.
That's so mean.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But have you noticed Dr. Rita's only face does, face on? Can you turn to the profile and see if you have a elongated skull that you're a goddess?
Wait a minute.
Uh-oh.
I'm trying to find something good to do work.
There you go.
There.
All right. That works.
That's awesome.
Oh no, it was kind of that in that theory. I mean, it would make sense, in the hierarchy of the gods and stuff. You could have that thing where, the story like the Anunnaki that came down. I mean, it's just, you could see how these different around the area. You could say this would be so and so God's people. By going here and you can see this tribe, like I said, you would clearly know, okay, this belongs to this, they're the followers of this God. I don't mess with them, because I don't want I don't want to end up with a battle.
Right.
I don't want to, have, Rama, coming across the land bridge, taking me out because, I messed with, I slayed the wrong giant.
Well, something I suggested in my book, was talking about the injection of genetic material to create these upgrades, because if we started out as Australopithecus, there's what happened naturally, and then there's this concept of, a genetic upgrade being introduced into a group. And so what better way of spreading genetic material? So if I can't marry or have sex with any of the bearded people, I have to go to the culture down the street to go hook up with them, and it takes that genetic material and spreads it out of my community into a much larger circle.
This took a turn.
Yeah, take a turn real quick.
It went from, well, you guys are all taken, I guess I gotta go down the street.
Sleep.
Damn.
No, I get that, because that's, and that basically, kind of tying everything up too, is just where there's that, where we said it's just, you go from, Homo erectus to, just all of a sudden there was something that occurred, because, we went from just learning to stand upright to suddenly just take off. Intelligence just took off. So something had to be introduced into the system, because that missing link isn't there.
One of the things that I bring up in the book is, there are apes that have been trained in sign language. Like one of them was Coco, who just in the last few years passed away. And Coco knew 3,000 words, and could actually carry on a conversation with individuals. And there were a couple of other ones, and I don't have their names in my brain. But one of them had an infant, and his name was Lousie. And she started teaching Lousie the sign language before the doctor started teaching Lousie the sign language.
Huh.
So it was already being passed on. And so, but they've taken apes and have taught them how to carve simple rocks, like primitive rocks. That took them about 10 years to do that, so I don't know what kind of a schedule they were on to do that in 10 years, and then they have this one situation where they taught, and I think it was actually Lousie, how to build a fire, and they taught him to gather the wood and how to stack it up. Now, they didn't make him use flint or anything. He actually had a lighter. But then there's actually videos of him with a stick and marshmallows, cooking marshmallows. So we have done a similar thing. We have gone and genetically engineered and genetically modified organisms on this planet. We have gone and started teaching apes how to use sign language or how to use tools or, anything like that. when I was working on that section, I just kept thinking of like Planet of the Apes and, Charlton Heston.
Yeah, have you seen? It's like it's kind of along the same line, but it's a little bit of a side note here. Have you seen the show Space Force yet with?
It was good.
Carell?
All right.
There's a second episode where they deal with the Epsilon phase out there in space, and they've got to do a repair. And so they've sent up a capsule where there's a monkey. So you have a chimpanzee and a dog on there, and so they've got to have the monkey do a spacewalk to go fix the satellite. I don't want to say I don't want to spoil it, but it's just when you see it, it's because it kind of does the same thing. Like they're trying to do sign language. Tell him to grab the drill. Okay, it's the same.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's a good show. Don't put your heart into it, but. It's one of those Steve Carell shows. Just leave it at that. It was good.
Yeah, so that's like I said. Well, back to the thing, but yeah, I mean, there's obviously things can be taught. I mean, it's just what's that line from? Was it Red October? Is it Red October where they say you can teach a horse to deal cards with enough voltage. Where they're talking, the cattle prods and stuff. It's to tell you that you can teach things to do things, but there's a whole different thing from like my misuse of that when I said intuitively. When suddenly you're able to go there from washing the sweet potato to where you're suddenly knowing how to prepare it as a dish. I mean, something occurred. I mean, that's the biggest. I mean, obviously, if we knew this, I mean, we would be, it's like we wouldn't have these shows on, what do you think happened? I mean, we obviously would know, but obviously, I mean, that's the crux of the question is, what was that catalyst? I mean, that's what we gotta. And,
my feeling is if there's anybody out there that says they know, then those are the people that you should run away from first.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because there's nothing out there and we haven't gone back in time and there's subjective evidence. I wrote a piece, called Matter of Proof. And it talks about, these different things, they find a bull and it's for ritualistic purposes, or the dolmen that they find in Northern Europe, they were burial grounds. And it's like, well, how does anybody know? Was anybody at the ritual? Did anybody attend the funeral? They don't know, and so then I get a little smarty pants in it. And I'm like, 5,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, an archaeologist might be digging through a garbage pit in St. Louis and finds this glass with golden arches on it and go, we must pray to the god of the golden arches. And one of the female goddesses, her name is Wendy. See, it's Wendy.
Exactly.
And it's for ritualistic purposes. It's
Chick-fil-A's the main mascot.
You don't know, and you can't say you know. You can say this is my opinion, and I'm sorry, but that's like
my shirt.
A soapbox thing
from the Life of Brian. It's one of my favorite things. The episode where Brian is escaping the city, and he drops the gourd, and one of his shoes falls off. And everybody's follow the gourd. The gourd is a sign. He said, and then the other one is follow the shoe, cast off your worldly possessions, follow this, and they all break off. They're all breaking off into the sex. And it's that same thing. It's like you have something it's something completely random. I mean, another little side note. I used to be a cub master, and so we went to this outing, and this guy was showing kids how to nap, arrowheads, and as he was doing it, he was giving them a story. It's like, if you ever come across these things, these need to be preserved because this is a culture center. I'm like, no, most likely what this is the brave was taking his children around, showing them how to do this. He probably got tired of, lugging the stuff around, stopped and said, and was doing them. And the little guy dumped the bag of arrowheads on the ground and he couldn't find them. And this becomes a whole family squabble. They march on. He's mad at the kid because he's lost all the arrowheads and he just spent all those days coming. And here, 100 years later, here's this guy telling me that this is a cultural center, that if we don't rope this whole thing off, we're going to lose all this history. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure he just lost his bag of arrowheads. I don't think this was some sacred spot where they traveled miles to come and make arrowheads. I'm pretty sure there's some kid that got grounded that day. Is how this came apart. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we find in indigenous cultures is this whole weird thing about death. So I'm going to put a different spin on it. It could be that this guy was actually a napper, and he had a bunch of arrowheads in his house, but when he died, they had to burn it down. And all of his possessions became taboo, and they couldn't touch him anymore. And that could be why they're just laying there, because there's some dead guy's stuff that... you're going to become ritually impure, and now you have to, go cleanse because you touched it. So.
Now it's in some historical, thing, and you can't figure out why the janitor's closet broom keeps smacking you in the head as you're going past the arrowhead case. It's because it's haunted.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh my God! So we're gonna have to have you back on, for sure.
Okay.
Yes, I need to get that other book and read that one too. But everybody needs to go check her out on her site, soulhealer.com. You've got, we barely even touched on a lot of the stuff. I'll give you a second here too. Just let everybody know some of the things that you offer as, besides just, spending an hour with three beardos.
And more. Don't forget more.
Well, I'm just a quasi beardo. I just
gonna get you a Santa beard.
He's the initiate. He's the initiate right now. We're trying to get him past the scratchy phase. We got to get him to commit.
That's about the best I can get. I don't know. It's
but your hair is long, and you could just clip it around the other side.
Oh man! So come over, bring it around, and then you have a ponytail down there.
It's the beard comb over.
I could do that.
And put a rubber band in it, and then you got a hair.
That's
you got a hair beard.
That's almost like an Amish neck beard. Is how that turned out with the.
So in addition to writing awesome books, what I do for my day job is I work as a medical intuitive. So I have a degree as a naturopathic physician, which is a holistic doctor who works with people with herbs and supplements and lifestyle changes, and a PhD in natural health counseling. And so a lot of people that contact me have health-related issues going on and want to get some, and I'm going to say, psychic insights into what's happening and what they can do about it. So it's a combination of intuitive work, kind of back and forth with, health and wellness protocols. I do a lot of, I'm going to say, life coaching with people, as well as energy work and energy medicine. So.
How are people doing during all these lockdowns and with the virus going on?
It's been really interesting. I have had a total of 2 calls of virus. I thought I would be busy as crap, but no. One person was concerned in a but I might get cancer kind of way, and it's like, oh God. And then one person actually did test positive for the Rona, and, but she was having some other stuff go on, and so she just wanted to get a kind of a timeline. But no, not really a whole lot. More it's just been, people whining and complaining on Facebook, and I think the whole thing is ridiculous, personally.
Yeah.
I could do a whole show on that.
That's awesome.
But
I think
I got a question.
Can you give me
this? I got a question. Can you give me the special potion to lose weight? What is the special potion?
Well, it's not really. See, sometimes people don't like me because I just kind of go, well, this is what you're doing, and so that's why it's not working. You're eating too much food. And then sometimes it's, a different, sometimes there's a lifestyle, especially with weight, there's a lifestyle issue that's going on. You're eating too much food, you're not eating the right kinds of foods, you're not exercising. But then there's something that's deeper, that there's some metabolic issue going on, or with women, one of the things that I found is if they have taken several courses of steroids, they'll put on weight, and can't get rid of it, and so doing some detoxing and cleansing can sometimes kind of break that cycle up, but it's all very individualized for each person that I work with.
Do you think Bang energy drinks might have an effect on him?
Say that again?
The Bang energy drinks, because he consumes those on an unhealthy basis.
And cigarettes and vaping.
Yeah. Do you think that might have some cause to the health?
Well, if it has a bunch of sugar in it, probably.
I don't know if energy drinks doesn't have sugar in it.
I need a.
Oh, no.
Sugars are friend. So this is the way that I like explaining it to people. So if you drink like 2 Cokes a day, or what has the equivalent of the sugar in 2 Cokes, which is usually about 9 teaspoons of sugar.
Holy crap.
That's like eating a candy bar. So
Yeah.
People that drink a lot of beer, so if you drink a 6-pack of beer every day, even if it's light beer, and I'll use light beer. All right, so I'm going to use you. So three cans of light beer equal a candy bar. So if you're drinking a 6-pack of beer, light beer every day, it's like you're consuming 2 Snickers bars, in addition to everything else you're eating.
Holy. Okay.
That's not good.
No, it's not. And then people are like, but I'm only drinking a little beer, and it's like, well, how much? And it's like, well, sometimes a 12-pack. I'm like, well, that's like 4 freaking candy bars, dude.
But it's light beer.
It's light. But
it's like you might as well just glue that bad boy on your hip. Maybe somebody lick it off.
Oh, damn.
That's fantastic. All right, so we're bringing you back on. So we're definitely going to do that. So, no, this is a lot of fun. Mark, thank you so much for getting us in touch with her. Said, I've got some of these on the schedule, and this is one of the ones I was really looking forward to, especially after reading your book. So I highly recommend it. Pretty sure it's available on Amazon.
Yes.
Look.
Yeah, I mean, it's at all the major bookseller places.
Yeah, so definitely everybody go support her. Stepping Out of Eden was the main one that we were talking about. We also touched on E.T. Chronicles, what myth and legend have to say about the human origin. So those 2 books were really talked about. So definitely go to Amazon, check those out, and then Mark, you had some.
Yeah, we have to get into the narcissist and empath book as well.
That's my newest book.
That's a good
there we
one.
go. So
we'll save the centerfold for the next time. Our magazine.
It looks
centerfold.
fairly thick.
Yeah, this is probably my thickest book, and now I'm working on a new and revised edition to it. Because of COVID, I've had all this time. So,
do you have an illustrated version for these 2?
I read.
Shove all the.
I read.
Come on,
Can you
guys
cram all the
behave.
information in the first 20 pages with some pictures? I'll be all right.
I will read, but you throw pictures in, I'm all in. I will not put that book down.
I'm all in. I can see. Oh, this is
but see, my books, or I have one book that's actually like kind of textbooky, but all my other books are just really pretty light reading. They don't have like super hard words. And, so this book, this newest one, people that have read it, especially ones that know me, they're like, I can hear your voice in my head talking because it sounds just like you. I'm like,
yep.
That was the point.
Exactly. Well, awesome. Well,
it's a therapeutic book.
Well, like I said, so we'll see about planning on that. So, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we got to wrap it up here. We got
okay. All right. Well, thanks for having me, guys. I had a good time.
Oh, good. I'm glad. That's always the thing. I love to wait, and I'm here. I'm like, please. Oh,
I hate it.
So, we'll definitely
thank you for
touch.
letting us, showing us that you're the best.
Thanks, Mark. I love you too.
All right.
Love you.
Dr. Rita, thank you very much. We will, like I said, we'll be in touch. We're going to get you rescheduled for on the schedule for another one so we can talk about your latest book.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good.
So, all right. Have a great night.
All right, good night. Bye, everybody.
You too.
Right.
All right. This episode was brought to you by Brott's Beard Care. Go to brottsbeardcare.com. Use promo code 3beards with a capital B, and you're going to save 20% on your order. We're also brought to you by Nanny Cakes. Go to Nanny Cakes 407 on Facebook. 407-923-2898. Central Florida area, you're going to mention that you know us. She's going to take pity on you and give you 15% off your cake just so you can take away, take that memory away by eating yourself to death with cake.
Pretty much.
So, go support her. Check us out on the social media platforms. We are everywhere. And patreon.com/3beards podcast. Become a beardo yourself. We would love you for it, and we can use it to possibly help Mark, kind of like Hair Club for Men, but maybe we could get the beard going, the play, we'd be able to help him with that. So Mark, really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks again for all your help. It's help with getting the guests. We always appreciate that.
We have 300.
I just appreciate the opportunity, and yet Max is on next. He's ready to go too. He's tops as well.
Yeah, well, like I said, we'll get that. So just wanted to thank you that. And then Austin, would you have real quick before we go?
No, we have 325 downloads left till we hit 2,000. So that's our goal for everybody listening before the end of the year. Please help us download, and hopefully at the 2,000th per download, we're going to send you a T-shirt and a signed magnet. So come on, help us out, please.
Yep. So do that. That would be awesome.
Click,
Like I said, try to get us
share, hit that bell.
Everything.
Yep. Everybody, thank you very much. Have a great evening. We will see you on the next one. Good night.